What happens when Hollywood thinks it has cracked the code? And then the audience simply shrugs. 1974 looked like a golden year on paper. Prestige directors, big stars, huge budgets. But behind the awards, buzz, and glossy posters, studios were quietly setting piles of cash on fire. Some films limped, some collapsed, and one of them helped scare Hollywood straight, just before the blockbuster era took over. Big stars, big topic, bigger disaster. Until on paper, this looked unstoppable. Lee Marvin, Richard Burton, a novel that had already stirred attention. The studio thought they were making a hard-hitting drama that would spark conversation and pull in serious box office. Instead, they got chaos. Production stories alone could fill a book. Tension on set. Direction that never quite found its footing. The tone swung wildly from serious drama to something that felt awkward and uneven. Audiences in 1974 were already shifting tastes. They wanted sharp, confident storytelling. This film felt messy and uncertain. Critics did not hold back. Reviews were rough. Word of mouth, even worse. Viewers who showed up expecting a powerful, focused story walked out confused by the uneven pacing and odd performances. The subject matter was heavy, but the execution felt clumsy. Financially, it struggled hard. It never came close to becoming the prestige hit the studio imagined. Instead, it became a cautionary tale about assuming star power can fix structural problems. It cannot. Not then. Not now. Sean Connery in a red costume. A floating stone head. What could go wrong? Everything. After leaving the world of James Bond, Connery clearly wanted to prove he was more than a spy in a tuxedo. So he chose one of the strangest science fiction projects of the decade. He's directed by John Boorman. This was supposed to be bold, thoughtful, visionary. It was also wildly confusing. The plot involved a future society split between immortals and warriors, giant talking structures, and philosophical speeches that sounded deep but often left audiences scratching their heads. The marketing had no idea how to sell it. Was it action? Was it art? Was it satire? Even the trailers seemed unsure. Viewers walked in expecting something cool and futuristic. And what they got was abstract monologues and a costume that instantly became legendary for the wrong reasons. The budget was not small. The returns were. It did not completely vanish, but compared to expectations, it landed with a thud. Critics were divided. Audiences were baffled. Over time, it found cult status. But in 1974, cult status does not pay the bills. Studios looked at this and thought, maybe we should not let every director go fully off the rails. A painful lesson. Romance plus Cold War politics plus Goldie Hawn. Sounds safe, right? Not quite. The studio believed they had a charming international romance on their hands. Based on a popular novel, with Goldie Hawn at the height of her fame, this felt like a smart, adult drama that would draw crowds looking for something more refined. The problem was tone. The film never decided if it wanted to be light and breezy or tense and serious. And the political backdrop felt heavy, but the romance felt soft. That clash created a strange viewing experience. Audiences in 1974 were also leaning toward sharper thrillers and edgier dramas. This one felt polite, almost too polite. It did not offend. It did not shock. It just did not excite. Box office numbers reflected that. It opened quietly and faded even more quietly. For a film with real expectations and a well-known lead, that is the worst outcome. Not outrage. Not controversy. Just indifference. Studios learned something uncomfortable here. A known star does not guarantee interest if the story does not feel urgent. Charm alone cannot carry a 2-hour movie. A respected novel. A serious thriller. This should have been easy money. Jon Voight starring in a tense story about tracking down hidden war criminals sounded like prestige gold. The source material was strong. The themes were serious. The marketing leaned heavily into credibility and intelligence. But intelligence does not always equal excitement. The pacing was deliberate. Some would say too deliberate. Instead of a pulse-pounding thriller, audiences got long investigative sequences and heavy conversations. It asked viewers to pay attention, to think, to connect dots. And in 1974, that audience was shrinking. The appetite for fast, visceral cinema was growing. This felt more like a quiet novel on screen. Financially, it underperformed relative to its cost and expectations. Not a total collapse, but far from the breakout hit the studio imagined. It simply could not compete with flashier entertainment-grabbing headlines. In hindsight, it is respected. At the time, it felt like a financial misfire, a reminder that prestige thrillers need tension you can feel, not just admire. A beautiful boat, endless ocean, endless budget concerns. I'm based on a true story about a young man sailing solo around the world. This film had all the ingredients for inspiration. Sweeping sea shots, a brave protagonist, real-life adventure. And yet, something went wrong. Sea productions are expensive. Weather delays, equipment challenges, logistics that spiral fast. The studio invested heavily, expecting families and young viewers to flock to this uplifting journey. But the marketing struggled to define it. Was it a teen adventure? A family drama? A serious survival story? It floated somewhere in between. And that in-between space can be deadly at the box office. Audiences showed mild interest, not excitement. The film did not crash spectacularly, but compared to the money poured into capturing those ocean views, the returns were disappointing. It became another quiet warning sign. Grand scale does not equal grand profit. Beautiful scenery does not replace a gripping narrative. In 1974, Hollywood kept learning this lesson the hard way. Ants, just ants. How expensive could that be? Very. Directed by legendary designer Saul Bass, this science fiction thriller sounded clever on paper. Super-intelligent ants begin organizing, evolving, and quietly challenging human dominance. Minimal cast. Desert setting. Controlled locations. It seemed like a tight, smart production, but ambition crept in. Bass wanted striking visuals and deep symbolism. The macro photography of real ants was groundbreaking. The problem? Audiences did not buy tickets for symbolic insect philosophy. They wanted tension. They wanted something big. Instead, they got long stretches of quiet observation and slow-build suspense that felt more art project than popcorn thriller. Marketing struggled badly. Posters tried to sell it like a horror movie. The film itself felt like an experimental science lecture with dramatic pauses. Reviews were mixed. And some praised its visual style. Many found it distant and cold. Box office returns were modest at best and weak compared to expectations. It later gained cult appreciation, but in 1974, cult status meant financial disappointment. Studios saw this and realized something painful. Smart ideas need mass appeal. Otherwise, even ants can quietly sink your investment. Stop-motion magic. Swords, monsters. What could go wrong? Nothing creatively. Financially? Different story. Ray Harryhausen's fantasy adventures were once reliable draws. Audiences loved skeleton fights and mythical creatures. By the mid-70s, though, tastes were shifting. Effects that once amazed began to look old-fashioned next to faster, flashier filmmaking styles. The Golden Voyage of Sinbad was not a total failure. It had strong visual craftsmanship and committed performances, but the budget was climbing. And expectations were higher than the final box office could support. Families showed up. Fantasy fans showed up. The mainstream audience did not. The pacing felt slower compared to emerging action trends. The spectacle, while charming, did not feel revolutionary anymore. It felt nostalgic at a time when viewers wanted something fresh. The returns were respectable, but disappointing relative to cost and marketing push. Studios noticed. Traditional fantasy formulas were losing steam. Within a few years, special effects would change forever. But in 1974, this felt like the end of an era. A beautiful one, an expensive one. Disney goes epic. Ice, airships, and big ambition. This was not small-scale family fun. This was adventure on a grand level. Massive sets, elaborate airship sequences, a mysterious, hidden civilization. The studio clearly believed they had their next big spectacle. As the problem was cost. Production expenses ballooned. Shooting in difficult locations and building large-scale visuals stretched the budget. Marketing doubled down, promising sweeping adventure that would rival major studio epics. Audiences were polite, but not passionate. The film did not bomb instantly, but it failed to justify the heavy investment. For a company known for reliable family hits, this one underperformed sharply relative to its ambition. Critics were lukewarm, and some admired the effort. Many felt the story lacked emotional punch. It looked grand, but it did not feel urgent. For Disney, this was a wake-up call. Big-scale adventure without a strong emotional hook can drift, and when it drifts, the box office follows. Paranoia was trending. This should have been a hit. Political thrillers were hot in the early 70s. Audiences were fascinated by conspiracy stories and shadowy corporations. On paper, this had everything. Warren Beatty, a sleek director, a chilling premise about a mysterious organization recruiting lone wolves. And creatively, it is sharp, moody, stylish. Financially, not so much. The Parallax View is cold by design, detached, clinical. It does not hold your hand. It does not offer comfort. That tone won critical respect, but it kept mainstream audiences at arm's length. People walked out impressed, but not energized. The pacing is slow burn, long stretches of silence. The ominous atmosphere. It builds tension quietly instead of exploding. In 1974, that approach limited its commercial reach. The box office returns were underwhelming compared to expectations for a Beatty vehicle. It was not a total collapse, but it certainly did not justify the prestige push behind it. Studios saw something worrying. Smart, stylish paranoia thrillers did not always equal mass profit. Sometimes they equal critical admiration and financial disappointment. A period romance from a respected director. What could go wrong? Quite a bit. Peter Bogdanovich had been riding high earlier in the decade. The studio trusted him. A refined adaptation of a classic novella seemed like a safe prestige bet. Elegant costumes, European settings, careful dialogue. But 1974 audiences were restless. They wanted sharp edges, not polite drawing room drama. Daisy Miller felt distant, quiet, almost fragile. As the central performance divided viewers. Some admired its subtlety. Others found it flat. The pacing moved at a measured literary rhythm that did not translate into box office momentum. It opened softly and faded quickly. For a director once seen as a golden boy of New Hollywood, this was a bruising moment. The returns were modest, far below what was hoped. Studios began asking tougher questions. Was prestige adaptation still bankable? Or were viewers drifting toward bolder, louder cinema? Not in hindsight, it has defenders. At the time, it felt like a miscalculation. A sequel with attitude, and a budget that got out of control. The original Billy Jack had been a surprise hit. It tapped into counterculture energy and found a passionate audience. So naturally, a sequel followed. Bigger, longer, more ambitious. Too ambitious. The production ballooned. The running time stretched. Editing became a challenge. Now the tone swung between courtroom drama, social commentary, and action beats that felt uneven. Fans of the original showed up. The broader audience did not. The film's length alone limited daily screenings, which hurt revenue potential. Word of mouth was mixed. Some appreciated its boldness. Many found it bloated. Financially, it struggled to match the momentum of its predecessor. When a sequel underperforms relative to expectations, studios feel it hard. This was not the cultural lightning strike the first film had been. It became a lesson about scale. Bigger is not always better, especially when control slips and focus fades. A musical remake of a beloved classic. In the mid-70s, bold move. The original Lost Horizon was iconic, so someone decided to remake it as a lavish musical, with a soaring score, expensive sets, sweeping landscapes. The budget climbed, then climbed again. But by 1974, audiences were cooling on old-fashioned musicals. The cultural mood had shifted. This felt like a relic from another decade trying to pretend nothing had changed. Critics were brutal. They questioned the casting, the pacing, Even the musical numbers themselves. Viewers who expected magic found something oddly flat. The box office response was disastrous. It did not just underperform, it collapsed relative to its cost. Studios stared at the numbers in disbelief. This film became shorthand for excess and misreading the market. A beautiful idea, executed at the wrong time, with the wrong expectations. The musical gamble that shook Hollywood's confidence. Shot in 1974 and released soon after. This was supposed to revive classic Hollywood glamour. Peter Bogdanovich again, a cast of recognizable faces, live singing on set to capture authenticity. It sounded daring, it looked expensive, it felt risky. And the decision to record vocals live without dubbing was meant to create charm. Instead, it exposed uneven singing and awkward pacing. Critics were merciless. Reviews focused on what did not work, rather than what did. Audiences stayed away. Word spread quickly that this was not the triumphant throwback people hoped for. Financial losses mounted. The film became one of the most talked about misfires of the era. More than just numbers, this one hurt reputations. It cooled careers. It made studios rethink lavish musical experiments. And just 1 year later, a certain shark would prove that Hollywood's future belonged to something very different. 1974 was not just a year of great films. It was a year of expensive lessons. Big stars failed, bold ideas misfired, studios guessed wrong, and the audience quietly moved on. So which of these disasters deserves a second look, and which should stay buried in the archives? Tell me below, and remember, sometimes the biggest flops rewrite the future.